Now, are you able to keep track of all the reissues of your recordings that are resurfacing on compact disc?
Not always. Sometimes if they send me copies, when you say reissues, I very seldom get reissues at all. I get the original issue,
Yeah.
but reissues I don't really know much about.
Well, there's a lot of stuff, because I keep getting, stuff from the past 40s, 50s, and 60s, and like that. Now everything's coming out on CD
On different
again.
labels.
And different
Yeah.
labels and stuff like this. And I was just curious, if, are you made aware of it when it comes out
Well,
and they contact
as
you?
a matter of fact, a young man came down last night, and excuse me, he brought some reissues that had originally been made on Savoy. Now, Savoy was sold to Clive Davis of CBS, who sold them to Joe Fields,
Right.
and then Joe Fields sold them to
Denon.
this come Denon. So
Denon,
Denon,
yeah.
the young man came down from Denon last night, and he gave me about 10 or 12 reissues that were originally on Savoy years ago.
Yeah. Well, that must be nice to have that in the collection.
It's nice to have, but it makes it very tough to find out who pays the money.
That's what I was getting to.
Bottom line,
Yeah. Now, do these companies ever contact you, make proper arrangements for obtaining?
I'm afraid that's sort of unheard of in the business.
Yeah.
Now, if you make the effort, let's say if I make the effort to track down a reissue or a release of outtakes, which has happened on occasion. You know what outtakes are? They're the ones that you're not supposed to. They're supposed to be thrown away, right? But certain companies issue the outtakes, but they don't. They neglect to pay you for them. But I found out about one of those situations, and we contacted the record company, and they very graciously agreed to pay for the reissue, for the new release of the outtakes. But normally, they don't let you know about this. The companies, in fact, I think they'd like to keep it a secret.
Oh, I imagine they would. But
Because it involves making additional payments, which they're reluctant. I use the word reluctant. That's a nice word to pay.
Well, in the 40s and 50s and 60s and 70s and that's such, I know this went on, and this was prevalent constantly, not to pay the artist. But I was wondering, though, here we are in the 80s, and all this is happening really quickly. I mean, you've got so many box sets coming. I got one of you the other day, solo piano on Jazz Alliance.
Jazz Alliance, yeah. That's a label I never heard of before.
Okay, that's Concord.
Concord.
And it's a solo piano thing you did in 1975.
Well, I take that back because I have heard of this because Carl Jefferson, the president of Concord, did tell me that there was a new label under his direction affiliated with Concord. Okay. So that's fine, but I mean, I'm sure this has happened with other companies where they don't bother to tell you.
Yeah, because it's kind of unusual they release this and not even contact you. Are you as comfortable in the recording studio as you are when you're playing live?
It depends on the ambiance. It depends on the personnel of the recording. On the recording, I have to admit there is a certain maybe freedom or relaxation or a certain looseness that you feel on a live date, a live session that may or may not be recorded. If it's recorded, then there's a certain tension there. If it's not recorded, or you don't know it's been being recorded, perhaps there's a little more relaxation, a little more freedom. But I'd say that generally in a studio, unless conditions are ideal, as far as personnel is concerned, as far as the engineer is concerned, as far as the sound you're getting, as far as the sound in the studio, then there's more tension if that doesn't exist.
Now,
but not enough to destroy the recording. It's just that you have a tendency to make more mistakes than you would normally make, I guess. So it takes longer, perhaps.
Now, can you, after a session is done, and say the recording's out for a while, can you pull back and not be so critical of yourself? Can you let the session go in your mind?
I think that happens sort of subconsciously. Mm-hmm. You forget, or you conveniently forget, or thankfully forget some of the things that may have happened that you weren't completely satisfied with. But they fade into, let's say, forgetfulness after a while.
And you can listen to the recording.
When you listen to it like a month later, unless you're super critical of yourself, which I am to an extent, you tend to forget the little things that could have been done better, let's say. And I have yet to make a perfect recording, so there are lots of those little things on my recordings, believe me.
Now, your work with bassist Ray Drummond and Billy Higgins,
You mean
And
Bulldog Drummond? Yes, on
Bulldog
bass.
drummer and Billy Higgins on Essence is some of the finest trio playing heard in years. Is the trio your favorite combination?
Well, I think it gives you a chance to play a lot more, and if you, the more you play, the more chances you have to develop your own personal style and so forth. And I think that's probably the format of preference. Duo playing is very good also, but I think trio playing is better. Of course, the ultimate, let's say, in personal expression is probably solo playing.
Right.
But very few of us are gifted enough to make solo playing an option.
Sustained. You're
Yeah.
probably the most respected accompanist in jazz. And with the young pianists of the 40s striving to establish themselves as soloists, how did you slip into the role of accompanist?
Well, I guess it was more chance than anything else because I got a job working for Ella Fitzgerald. And of course, that's an accompanying job. At the same time, we did have a trio that worked with her, consisting of her husband Ray Brown on the bass and Charlie Smith on drums. So I learned a lot about accompanying from working by virtue of having worked with Ella, because there's a certain style involved in accompanying that you cannot use if you're playing in any other format. It's sort of a laid-back, follow the leader kind of style. You try not to get in the way of the soloist, and you try to provide the proper harmonic and rhythmic background, not jumping out in front too much, staying behind, providing the support and the rhythmic support along with the harmonic support. But some soloists, some singers particularly, like a single line accompaniment. For instance, Sarah Vaughan like that, and some other singers like that. But Ella didn't like that. She liked a full chordal,
Right.
brass section, full ensemble kind of accompaniment, which complemented her style of singing, I think, more.
But you're composing as you go, aren't you? You're composing
I
the
think
whole
so.
harmonic
Exactly.
chordal patterns that will
Exactly.
seem
I
like
think
a
that's what
band.
happens. Yes.
Yeah.
You have to create another line that's unobtrusive, that doesn't get in the way, and yet provides support when needed.
Now, did you work with Billy Eckstein before that, or was that after?
That was before. Yes, before that.
And were you accompanying him too?
No, with Eckstein it was a big band.
Uh-huh.
I never worked with Eckstein as a solo, as an accompanist, only with a big band. And there was very little playing piano, because as you know, in big bands, if you get 8 bars, you can consider yourself fortunate.
That's right.
Particularly, you got about 15,000 horns who all want to play solo, and generally do.
Where does the piano fit?
Generally, where's the piano? Yeah, out in the next room. So,
Now, have you seen a change in the role of the pianist since the early 50s?
not really, except for one thing, perhaps. There are more small groups today than there were in those days. Everything in the 50s, for the most part, was big band, and the problems with the big band. But I'd say that after, it seemed to me this shift to the smaller groups came about shortly after World War II. A lot of the big bands were broken up because a lot of the members went into the armed services. Some of them came back. Most of them did. But even when they came back, the big bands didn't exist anymore. So the big bands were broken up into small combinations, small groups, and I think that's when the big push for small groups began. And the nightclub owners, of course, thought that it was a lot less expensive to hire small groups than big bands.
Yeah.
In fact, the clubs weren't that big anyway, so they couldn't, big bands wouldn't fit too well. But I think that shift started about at that time, and it's continued since.
Yeah. Well, you came up with all the trios. Nat King
Right.
Cole, Jamal,
That's right.
everybody. Errol Garner.
The Soft Winds, there were
Yeah.
some really good
Great
groups,
trios.
really. Oscar Peterson,
Yeah.
to mention a local citizen,
What
Denizen.
What were your first experiences at the piano?
I suppose the very first goes back a few years, but I suppose just walking up or crawling up to the
Yeah.
piano up on a chair and just banging out a few notes, But
Now, did you play classical?
yeah, I studied classical music for a time. So I studied for about 10, 11 years, and the latter part of that time I got into jazz for one reason or another. I guess because of the fact that I began to listen to people like Teddy Wilson, first Fats Waller, then Teddy Wilson, Earl Hines, Duke Ellington, and then Art Tatum.
Of course.
After that, you might as well stop listening. You know, of course, Oscar Peterson. But yeah, I think that sooner or later, every pianist is influenced by some of those people. Perhaps George Shearing might be included. And there have been some fine pianists. You know, there are plenty of people to listen to. There was no shortage.
Oh, not at all. Now, are there any musical memories from your childhood that remain especially vivid?
Well, I suppose when I first started to play, shortly after I began to play, I was studying at a place called Dusenberry Studios, and they put on a spring concert every year. And I was, of course, asked to play because all the students at the school had to play. And I played a piece called Dizzy Fingers. Have you heard of that?
Mm-hmm.
Zez Confrey, you know. Are you a pianist, by the way?
That's right.
Oh, then you know about all this, the Dizzy Fingers. And I had to put on a tuxedo, full dress tuxedo, you know, like tails, the whole bit, a wing collar. And first time in my life I'd ever worn a tuxedo. And I was on the stage here in this theater, seated about 3,500 people in Pontiac, huge, large theater for Pontiac. And yeah, I'm playing Dizzy Fingers. By the time I got ready to come on, I was dripping in perspiration, you know. It was running all down my hands, my fingers. My fingers were slipping off the keys, you know. And when your fingers slip off the keys playing Dizzy Fingers, you're in trouble.
You are, definitely.
That was pretty.
Did you maintain it?
Very embarrassing. Well, I got through it somehow.
Yeah.
When I got through it, I think the audience, some of them were laughing so hard. The ones that weren't applauding were laughing, you know, and some of them at the same time.
Now, did you perform with brothers Thad